These guys survived the David Kahn era of Timberwolves basketball and live to tell about it. It's Flagrant Howls.
Judd, you're in the backyard of the Iowa Wolves here for this episode of Flagrant Howls.
Waterloo. And I could actually go downstairs because we're staying at a casino. I could go downstairs and put all of my cash right now on the Timberwolves to win the NBA title.
You mean the Phoenix Suns from
I gave you a shout out on Twitter. You called it last week. You're like, I don't want to play them. And then they played them on Sunday.
I'll say, hey, my guy Kyle, because I gave him the same rankings, he pushed back aggressively. He's like, dude, no, the Suns are not even in my top 4 teams I'm most worried about. Gonna have to have a little talk with Kyle tomorrow and see how he feels about that.
I trusted you, and it turned out to be, at least from what we saw in a pretty damn important game on Sunday, warranted.
Yeah, well, let's talk a little bit about it. We know who the playoff matchup is going to be, and we know how awful the Wolves have looked against the Suns. And I also want to go through an exercise looking at these rosters with you here after we shout out our friends at Nicolay Law, the exclusive personal injury law firm of Flagrant Howls. Now, Nicolay Law is proud to serve the Twin Cities community. You see them around. They're just your normal everyday folks, the ones you see at the gas station, walking the dog, maybe at your local watering hole. The difference is these are normal everyday folks who happen to have law degrees that can help you when an unexpected accident occurs. You can give them a call at 1-855-NICOLAY, or you can start your path to winning at nicolaylaw.com. Get Minnesota's local award-winning injury lawyers. Get Nicolay. Again, that's nicolaylaw.com.
Is Russ a 2 or 3 on the basketball team?
I think he's definitely a volume scorer. I would say he's like a 2.
But I mean,
like
lanky?
He's a wing. He's like a 2 or 3 kind of a guy. Yeah.
Dude's in great shape.
Yeah. He's in better shape than we are, probably. Running around
that look?
Hanging all those billboards up.
I don't even think that didn't even occur to me that I might say that I am in nearly as good a shape as Russell Nicolay.
So the Wolves have played the Suns 3 times. They've gotten smoked all 3 times. 2 of the games were 2 of the Timberwolves' worst defensive performances, and then 1 of the games, they only scored 87 points. It was one of their worst offensive performances. We did, as you alluded to, we put together a list of 9 teams last week, the other Western Conference playoff play-in teams, ranked in order of how hard would this 7-game series be, and I put the Suns number 1, Nuggets number 2, because I think the Wolves have just like matched up well against the Nuggets, even going back to the playoffs last year. Like they have guys they can sort of throw out there that cause a problem for the Nuggets. And the Suns are sitting here with, first of all, Kevin Durant. Like if you're going to rank the best players in this series, just take both rosters. This is an exercise we can do. Kevin Durant's the best player in the series. Now Nuggets, Jokic is the best player, so you wouldn't have the best player in either one of those series.
Correct.
I've gone back and forth, Anthony Edwards or Devin Booker. I think you still have to give Devin Booker the benefit of the doubt that he'd be the second best player in this series.
Yep.
And then it's probably like Anthony Edwards. I would say Rudy Gobert just for his defense and inside scoring.
Yep.
Cat might be 5. So you might go like Suns with Durant, Booker, and then Anthony Edwards, Gobert. Maybe Cat is 5. But the problem is, and then you get to like Bradley Beal. By the way, Bradley Beal, who is a 30-point scorer like 3 years ago, who's now accepting this sort of third wheel role on this team because he wants to fit in and win games.
Yep.
But the problem here is Kevin Durant and Devin Booker are still getting anything they want against the Timberwolves for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
Anthony Edwards is not against the Suns. He only shot the ball like 7 or 8 times yesterday. They're just running defenders at him. Bradley Beal, after the game, said, you got to just foul his ass. That's my strategy.
Yep. But they've definitely tipped their hand on the fact that he is not going to beat them.
Yeah. And Cat, I mean, he's 2 games back from this injury. The integration has not gone smoothly.
Yes.
Putting him in the top 5 players in the series, but you're not always getting the peak version of Cat. You're getting this erratic version half the time. And then Nurkic can be, Nurkic as kind of the enforcer who can rebound and score a little bit inside. Plus, Grayson Allen would be in the mix as a top 10 player in the series. Best 3-point shooter in the league percentage-wise.
Mm-hmm.
Give me Naz Reid. Give me Mike Conley in here too. But the fact that the Suns have dominated the Wolves 3 times, and they have probably the two best players in this series, and the Wolves have a week to find answers, is really unsettling.
It is, but here's the thing. This is going to be the ultimate test in some ways of Chris Finch, because you now have to counter what you're going to do. Here's a couple of questions, too. Number one, what's the counter? Like, you now have seen, I think the Suns, unless I am missing something completely, have tipped their hand of their approach. So, like, I don't think there's much that they've left it in the closet as far as, oh, my God, it's game one, and now they're doing this? We didn't expect this, okay? So my question is, what's the counter? What are the, like you can't just accept, well, they're going to stop Ant, so it's done. Like, that's not an answer. The answer is, okay, how do you free up Ant? What do you do with Ant here to maximize him? And that's a coaching thing. That's a schematic thing. Like, you can't just say to Ant, well, you can't have all those guys run at you. That's not a realistic approach. Here's my other question for you, Phil Mackey, because there's a week off. Saturday afternoon, Target Center, packed house, place going crazy, tip-off. And this is going to sound crazy at first, but please consider it. Is Karl-Anthony Towns on the floor when the game begins? Or is Naz Reid on the floor when the game begins? Because there is definitely, one, he's rusty, which I'm not holding against him. That ain't his fault. But two, you saw this team operate at maximum efficiency with Naz Reid, because it's not all about the most talented guys. It's not just about what basically boils down to my fantasy lineup against yours. It's about schematics. It's about personnel. So those are my two questions for you, Phil. If you are Chris Finch, one is, what are some of your responses now? Because you got a week to come up with them, and you might even know right now what you're going to do. But two is, what's your starting lineup on Saturday? And I just to be clear, I'm not saying Cat doesn't play. I'm just saying, does he start for you?
I don't know what the counter is. If I did, I would probably not be podcasting about the Timberwolves. I'd be working as an assistant coach in the NBA. So I don't know what the counter is.
You might be a head coach.
I don't know what the Cat solution is, because it's not like they have some sort of example against the Suns early this year where, whoa, if you put this lineup out there, it looks great against the Suns. Like, they've just gotten clobbered 3 times. So I think you start the series with Cat in the starting lineup, because what you're going to have to lean on to start with is, with Cat in the lineup, that was, I think I saw that the Wolves' original starting 5 was like the 4th most effective 5-man lineup in the NBA this season. So and there's a reason why you were the number 1 seed in the West before the Karl-Anthony Towns injury. So I think you start the series with him in there and you sort of cross your fingers. As far as what is the adjustment to be made, I don't have an answer. I don't know if, like, maybe Dane Moore has grinded some film. You can check out his podcast. I don't know what the answer is. But I will say this. I think the Wolves have more answers they can try to pull from than the Suns do in a 7-game series, to your original point. You've sort of seen, the Suns have just come out, like, you've seen what they do. You've seen what their punches are. You've seen everything that they can throw at you for the most part. I don't know if the Suns have seen everything that the Wolves can throw at them. Now, that's not to say that you could try throwing 3 other things or a couple different lineup combinations out and they all fall flat and you lose in 5 games. I think at this point, at best, it's an even money series. A lot of people are going to just flat out pick the Suns to win this series. So you have to find some sort of answer here. But I think the Wolves are deeper. Again, it might just be negated because the Suns have probably the 2 best players in this series, and they've got these 3-point shooting, flamethrowers that if they're on, it's going to be hard to. It's just going to be hard. They're getting a bunch of open looks too, but the Suns have thrown their best punch at the Wolves. The Wolves have come nowhere near throwing their best punch at the Suns, and Chris Finch has been a master of adjustments over the 2-year arc of the Rudy Gobert tenure here. But here's the other thing on the coaching, Judd. We're talking about, Chris Finch, man. Chris Finch always has an answer. He's always he figured out the Rudy Gobert thing after the first year. He always has something, right?
Sure.
Well, Frank Vogel is a championship winning NBA coach.
He's good.
He went in, he took over the Lakers, helped them. Now, of course, like it's nice to have LeBron James and Anthony Davis as chess pieces. I think the Lakers had a great advantage as an older team, getting a 3-month pause in the season to get their legs back under them. But Frank Vogel has won an NBA championship as a coach. And maybe almost as impressively, 10 years before that, he was the coach of a feisty Pacers team that gave the Dynasty Heat teams with LeBron and Dwayne Wade and Chris Bosh a lot of problems in the Eastern Conference playoffs. So I don't even think you can go in saying, well, at least Chris Finch is going to have a week to sort of tinker. Like, Frank Vogel also gets a week to tinker and tweak and plan ahead for what the Wolves might look to counter with.
Right. And I guess in Finch's case, I'm not even praising him. I'm just saying he's got a week to figure it out. Like this is going to be a great test for Chris Finch because it's not all a player thing. It's a personnel thing too. As far as Durant goes, okay, so if I saw this correctly, I watched the first quarter of the game on Sunday and then streamed the rest on the app. But as far as he goes, is your defensive approach to basically glue McDaniels to him? Like what's the approach there? Because you know what? The Suns get a lot of credit for their approach to Ant thus far in 3 games has worked really, really well. So when it comes to Durant, like my starting point this week in what can we do? And by the way, this series does not have to be aesthetically pleasing. So like it could get ugly. I'm sure it won't be pleasing all the time, but you're trying to win games, not win style points. Do you take Jaden and glue him to Durant and say don't let him up as much as possible? Because it seems to me like the starting point, if you're going to win this series, has to be neutralizing him as best as possible. You're not going to totally do it, but you also can't let him go off or you're not going to win games.
Yeah, I mean, I would guess that Jaden is going to get the assignment a lot on Kevin Durant. Could also see Anthony Edwards in some cases, but maybe some Kyle Anderson. But Jaden McDaniels, you should really say to him, "Hey man, you didn't play last year in the playoffs because you broke your hand. You have one focus, and it's not to shut down Kevin Durant,
right?
But it's to make his life a little harder." Because here's the thing. Kevin Durant's been playing in the playoffs since 2010 as a 21-year-old with Oklahoma City. And from 2010 all the way through this year, we've seen him in, 12 different playoffs? 12 different playoffs. He's played in 166 career playoff games. You know how many teams have thrown their best defender at Kevin Durant in series, in games, playoffs, despite him seeing the best wing defender of every team, even going back, I think like Bruce Bowen was guarding him in the Western Conference playoffs for the Spurs back in the day. Mm-hmm. He has led the NBA playoffs in scoring on 5 different occasions for the entire playoffs. And there was a year where he didn't lead the playoffs in scoring. That was 2020-21, where he averaged the most points he's ever averaged in the playoffs, 34 points a game with Brooklyn. So what's tough about this is you can make his life a little harder, but he's a 7-footer that can get his shot off wherever. He's going to average like 27 or 30 points per game in the series. So I think it's more about, can you throw Bradley Beal off more than you did yesterday? Can you throw Devin Booker off? So can you get Devin Booker to be shooting 38% in the series? You know, I'm not saying you just let Kevin Durant score 40 because you can't let that happen either, but I don't know that you're going to just put him in a box where he's only going to shoot 8 for 25 and score 25 points.
But this is also a big part of the reason that Jaden got that extension was for things like this.
Yeah.
So I'm just saying, what's the starting point of, and then Ant, you know what, too? As much as Ant needs to score more and have big games, this also is where defensive Ant comes in as well. I mean, we've seen him at times absolutely shut guys down. It's been impressive. And so this series is going to be, for lack of a better term, a pain in the ass. It's going to be that.
And to that point, if they get through this first round, it'll heighten so many things. It'll heighten Anthony Edwards, like it'll get him to the next level. It'll, for anyone that cares about the Wolves getting national attention, I mean, you better believe you'll be on the map after beating this Suns team in the first round.
Yep.
but it should also give you the confidence that whoever you face in the second round, third round, like this, I still stand by it. My rankings from last week. This is the hardest playoff matchup for the Wolves. Not counting like the Celtics coming out of the Eastern Conference. And I'm not saying that the other matchups were easy. I think there's a lot of hard matchups here. The Lakers, full strength, would have been a hard matchup. The Mavericks, the way they've played defense lately. Like, there's some hard matchups. But
this is the worst one as far as personnel, I think.
Yeah. But here's another saving grace for the Wolves, all right? In addition to having a week to figure this thing out. And they are the best defensive team in the league. So I'm sure they will have an answer. I would be shocked if they just get smoked 4 straight games. How many different times in basketball series have you seen? I mean, look at when the Bucks won the finals in 6 games against the Suns, by the way. The Suns looked like the best team. They took a 2-0 lead in the series. Mm-hmm. They looked like the best team. They had Chris Paul at the time. It was pre-Kevin Durant. They basically swapped Chris Paul for Kevin Durant here. But a good Bucks team that could play some defense, had some length, went back into the film room, and they came up with some tweaks. Like, we've seen series change after 2 games. So you like regular season to postseason, Anthony Edwards kind of dismissed it like, well, yeah, they dominated us in the regular season, but here's the postseason. But here's the other thing. Over the last 30 years, the team that finished number 1 in the regular season in defensive net rating, which the Timberwolves did, they are the number 1 defense in the NBA defensive net rating. 87% of number 1 defenses advance past the first round. So it would be, and by the way, the Suns can play some defense once in a while, but and offensively, the Suns are like 10th. They're not one of the top 3 or now. If everyone full strength, you probably put the Suns higher than 10th in offensive net rating. But the number 1 defense, the last 30 years, advances past the first round 87% of the time. They make it to the conference finals 70% of the time. And they get to the NBA finals 35% of the time. So just having the number 1 defense is a great first starting point going into the playoffs.
Right.
But obviously the Suns have put up 2 kryptonite performances on this defense. So can they go back to the drawing board, Chris Finch, Rudy Gobert, etc., and come up with a different and better defensive game plan? And then like Cat, it looked clunky. They're trying to integrate this huge unicorn.
That's why I asked about
back into the mix.
Game 1, because you don't play again now. Like you're off. That's why I asked. I wasn't trying to say that if Cat didn't start Game 1 that he doesn't start again. But I'm just saying, for the sake of where you were when he came back, which was in a pretty good place, and in the sake of now trying to get him back into the flow, which, by the way, I think impacts a lot of guys. Like, it's not just a Cat looks clunky. It's everybody sort of like is like, okay, Cat's back. We need to do this. We need to do that. And I'm sorry. I don't think that you can start the series with that being a concern at all. Like, you've got enough trying to stop Phoenix that if you're consciously worried about how do we get this guy who we perceive as a star player back in, if you didn't have Ant, I would then say there's no out here. You have to play Cat. But with Ant there, I'm most concerned about how do you look like you are in sync the moment the ball is tipped, and could that impact Karl's role?
I think what kind of bothers me the most is like Anthony Edwards still tends to defer to Cat too often when Cat's out there.
Sure.
And that's like without the elephant in the room of trying to reintegrate him back in after 3 or 4 weeks out with an injury.
Right.
But you saw it like Anthony Edwards playing 35 minutes and only shooting the ball 7 times. Some of that is Phoenix putting attention on him, but a lot of teams put attention on him and he still finds a way. I think sometimes he gets into the mode of like, okay, like Karl's got to do his thing over here. So again, they made it work before the injury. The first, 55 games of the year, they were the number 1 seed in the Western Conference. Mm-hmm. And so we know that they can make it work. And Karl was having maybe the best year of his career in terms of just overall efficiency and defensive performance. It's just tough that you couldn't get him back like a week earlier, and now you have to figure this thing out on the fly. But there's also like, I know you have to get going here because you've got you're sitting in a hotel room in Iowa.
Extended checkout.
They're going to knock on your door in like 2 minutes.
Any moment now.
But I think there's a speculative bigger question before the actual series starts that we can talk about, maybe on Wednesday's episode, about what happens if this series goes the way that a lot of Wolves fatalists think it's going to go. A lot of Wolves pessimism here after yesterday.
Well, they saw yesterday's game, But I mean, this is not the NBA playoffs circa 10 years ago or so, when it was just ordinarily chalk. Like they could lose this series, and now if they go out in 4, it's a monumental collapse. And no matter what, if they don't win it, it's disappointing. But there's also a conversation to be had about the fact that this is a difficult. I mean, this is never going to be easy. There were very few, as you documented in your rankings, there were very few teams where you were like, oh, bring that team on in particular. Yeah. We'll kick their ass. That was I think that was a list of 1.
Yeah, I mean, like it's the Kings are the only team that you would have said, but even the Kings have given the Wolves problems. They've got some injury issues, but
this series will say a lot though about where this team truly is.
Yeah, it will. This would be, well, I was going to say the second best playoff series win in franchise history, but there's only been 2 other ones.
Yeah.
The Kings series win to get to the Western Conference Finals.
Super impressive.
So it's not a very long list, but yeah, this would be an accomplishment. So tons more discussion on this series throughout the week. We just wanted to jump in here and sort of throw some initial talking points out, opinions out, but it does feel like a very fatalist, pessimistic attitude among Timberwolves fans right now with this worst case scenario first round draw. But we'll see. We'll see where the attitude is toward the end of the week. I think it's going to be tough to feel anything until you see a game, like game 1. Does it look any different than the 3 regular season matchups?
Right.
But we'll see.
Confidence is not a huge thing among, and for very good reason, the Minnesota sports fan.
We're very fragile.
I don't blame people, actually.
Yeah, it's been 3.5 decades for the men's teams of just bashing our heads and pulling the rug out. So we'll see how we navigate this week. We got Kyle back in the mix on Flagrant Howls. Tomorrow we'll preview it with Jim Pete. If you haven't already, click the like button and the subscribe button on the SKOR North YouTube channel. And please give us a 5-star rating and a positive review on the Flagrant Howls podcast feeds as we head into the postseason here. Deep breaths, everybody. Deep breaths.